People always talk about when in Anakin/Vader's timeline was he at his prime, his all-time most powerful state of being. Some say right before Obi-Wan dismembered him. Others say it's after he's fully become Darth Vader and pulls even more strength from the dark side. It's difficult to say, because we only have the movies and the Clone Wars animated series for context. I say only, even though I just described hundreds of hours of content revolving around Anakin Skywalker. But even so, it still feels like we've barely scratched the surface on how strong Anakin actually is. Some of us turn to books or comics or theory videos like this one for an answer. So before we pick our version of Anakin, we have to consider the separation that George Lucas made very clear. When Anakin became Vader, Anakin died. That is to say that the person that Anakin was destroyed and replaced with Darth Vader. Anakin's hopes and dreams of becoming a Jedi Master and a loving father to his children and a husband to Padme all died on Mustafar. Every time Vader is called Anakin in Star Wars Rebels, or the movies or the comics, it's usually followed by Vader angrily rejecting the name. He doesn't even associate with the identity anymore. Darth Vader believed that Anakin was weak, which is an interesting point. Was Vader aware of the power difference in the dark side and the light side, from how he was as Darth Vader from who he was as Anakin? Is he aware of that power difference? I'd say so, but once you join the dark side, you do become arrogant and stubborn to anything other than your own self-righteous indulgence of power. So it's difficult to say whether or not this belief was even true. Also, we got to see a lot more of Vader's powers actually develop in the movies and comics than we ever did Anakin's. You could argue that Anakin was always shackled to the Jedi Code, while Vader was able to lean into the dark side for strength. We see him develop his Force abilities and lightsaber combat. Again, we do get to see Anakin develop in the Clone Wars, but while there was a lot of episodes in that series, it was a very small time frame in his lifespan. We have to consider that Vader's suit did two things for him: caused him a lot of pain, which in turn gave him a lot of strength. Palpatine made his suit incredibly painful and uncomfortable. Now, we're not going to go into details in this video on what his suit's features were, just understand that it sucked big time. However, Vader was able to use this pain as fuel into his strength. Therefore, does his suit make him more powerful than Anakin? He did have to work a lot harder to perform physically. He had to channel a lot of his Force strength into basic combat skills, a hindrance Anakin wouldn't have had to deal with. So you could argue the suit increased his connection to the Force, making him more powerful, but it was more a requirement to function than a honed skill. It probably gave him more raw power, but his power wasn't as focused. Darth Vader changed his lightsaber fighting style up once he was down to one organic arm. The Force flows naturally through only organic limbs, so he had to resort to one-armed fighting with a lightsaber. And while Anakin did lose an arm in Episode 2, pretty early on in his life, it was probably a lot easier to work with one robotic limb than three. Nonetheless, Vader obviously made it work and was still a formidable warrior with the lightsaber. But you have to wonder if pre-suited Anakin with three limbs would have an edge over Vader with his one limb in terms of lightsaber combat. It's important to note that Vader had a ton of weaknesses Anakin did not have to deal with. Vulnerability to elements like water or lightning, for example. He was totally dependent on his suit, so if it was damaged in any way, Vader would be crippled in combat. He always used his anger and hate to push through, despite however much damage that he received, but still, a weakness nonetheless. Also, the suit needed to be maintained daily. Vader's human body had to be separated and scrubbed by robots while his suit underwent mechanical maintenance. Yes, Vader could venture off-world on missions, but he would likely always need to return back to his home base for upkeep, something Anakin wouldn't have to do. A fully organic person could live off the land if need be, but Vader needed a feeding tube among other health aids just to survive. And something that I don't think many people consider is that Vader had a very hard time sleeping. His breathing respirator didn't have an off switch in terms of audio. It was going all night. Vader had a very hard time sleeping, so you have to consider the fact that Vader's probably always in a condition where he's tired and grumpy. He never has a good night's sleep, and that probably doesn't provide him with much energy throughout the day. I don't know, just something to consider. That's just one other edge that Anakin would have over Vader, a good night's sleep. While Anakin wasn't free from weaknesses, his were all mostly of emotional nature. We're talking about power in this video, but from an emotional standpoint, Vader would likely have the edge there. He was firm in his belief in the dark side, whereas Anakin would likely always struggle with what's right and what's wrong. Obviously that's a double-edged sword for Anakin, because if he channels into that anger, he ends up being more powerful in combat, but Vader's always dialed into that power, so he probably has more experience in it and is better at harnessing it. Vader was always very manipulative and crafty with his words. I think all he would have to do is just say the right thing about Padme to piss Anakin off, and Anakin would go into a rage, but not a good kind of rage. I think Vader would be able to take advantage of him in this state. And not because obviously Anakin and Vader are the same people. I mean, it's just a good combat tactic that only somebody who's mentally sound and stable would be able to do. I'm going to briefly share my thoughts before moving on to the conclusion. Here's the thing, I don't think that Anakin in his most powerful state even exists in the Star Wars universe. I think Anakin would have thrived more in the middle, between the light and the dark. It's a shame Qui-Gon wasn't able to raise Anakin, as that's the line that he walked as well. Qui-Gon rejected the Jedi Code to a degree, and would have provided much better counsel to Anakin than Obi-Wan would have. Even Mace Windu, who was an avid anti-Anakin council member, would have been better off for Anakin's growth, as his combat style tapped into the dark side, and Mace was very aware of how to wield anger as a weapon and not get lost inside it. If only Mace hadn't been so stubborn and naive, he could have recognized Anakin's potential ahead of time instead of fearing it. After all, Anakin was pulled so strongly to the dark side because of what happened to him in his life. Of course, Palpatine was pulling the strings behind a lot of these events, but it could have made a large difference if he'd went through the proper stages of mental recovery and channeled his energy into other thoughts and ideas. Anyways, I believe the most powerful version of Anakin is one where Anakin does not become Darth Vader, or still does, just not in the suit. I think the suit neutered him in terms of his potential. Palpatine knew it too. It's funny how pissed he was at Anakin about it. Literally groomed him his whole life, then he goes and gets melted to near death on Mustafar. But in terms of information that we have access to now, can we point to a time where he was in his most powerful state of being? No. At some point in Vader's life, he was probably more powerful than Anakin was before he was dismembered. But if Anakin had had a chance to grow up and continue growing in natural organic power, not suit power, Anakin would have doubled or even tripled the power that Darth Vader had at his peak. That's my opinion anyway. After all, Anakin had the highest midichlorian count ever seen by the Jedi. But when he lost most of his body, he lost most of that count too. So when was Anakin at his most powerful? The answer is when he was a kid and he had all 4 organic limbs. Just kidding. Well, when I think of Anakin at his most powerful, I always think to the scene where he's storming the Jedi Temple with the 501st Legion behind him, full of new purpose and hate, anger, resolve. He knew what he was going to do. He knew what he was going to do, and it wasn't going to be pretty. He was on a mission to kill his old self, along with any Jedi in his path. He was tapping into a power that he had not quite fully indulged in before. And honestly, we haven't seen the sick moves he probably pulls off in the Jedi Temple as he wipes out Jedi one by one. We have an idea as to which Jedi he killed, which Jedi Masters even that he killed, but we haven't seen it. And in this scene, this was before he got rattled by Obi-Wan and Padme. In this scene, we see focused rage, the kind of focused rage that Darth Vader has. The thing that would give Darth Vader an edge over Anakin in almost every situation. And the cool thing about this scene is that technically Anakin is Darth Vader here, right? He's not in the suit, but he's still Darth Vader. Now, this isn't an 100% guarantee when Anakin was at his strongest, because like I mentioned earlier, it's impossible to say. This is just my opinion. Hopefully with the new Obi-Wan show, we get to see some Clone Wars flashbacks that might shine a light on just how powerful Anakin really is. Alright, that's going to do it for this video, guys. Hope you guys enjoyed it. What about you? When do you think Anakin was at his strongest? And do you think Anakin could take Vader in a fight? Leave your answer in the comment section below. May the Force be with you.